out would lead to another massive round of fiscal stimulus. But this time, they propose to pay for much of it, or all of it, through increased taxes. For his perspective on the Democrats' plans, welcome now David McIntosh, president of the Club for Growth. David, great to have you back with us. You're all about growth. So give us your analysis of where we are right now in the proposals. They aren't law yet, but in the proposals, what they would do to economic growth in this country.
Thank you, David. We just saw the House version voted out of committee with over $3 trillion in tax increases. That bill would be devastating to our economic growth. It will stop the recovery after the COVID shutdown and frankly could send us into another recession. The $3 trillion in tax increases includes the highest personal rate that's been in effect since the Jimmy Carter days. It would make the United States, I think, second among industrialized countries in terms of the highest tax rate for the highest earners. In a place like New York, where you have additional income taxes, it makes it as high as 60%. People stop investing at that point. The economy slows. It will be a disaster. It will cost people their jobs. And the spending side is already creating inflationary pressures. Gas prices are up. Food prices are up. Our grassroots folks tell us that's what they're very worried about with coming out of this bill as well.
So David, I get the impression you don't love it overall. You're not a big fan. But I wonder, are there some parts of it that you like better than others? Because we talked to the Penn-Wharton budget model who've really taken it apart, and they distinguish, for example, between, on the one hand, some transfer payments, some of the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit payments, on the one hand, on the other hand, some investment in training, in child care, in fact, to help people go back to work that they say could increase productivity in the country. Do you draw that distinction?
I think there could be things like that make it easier for go back to work, but they're a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the $3 trillion of increases that they're proposing and the giant welfare type payments with those transfer payments. We've started running ads, David, in Democratic districts because Democrats are not for this outside of Washington, and we're educating the voters and urging them, call their member of Congress, tell them vote no on this bill because it would destroy the economy and hurt the future prospect for American growth.
So, David, what do we know about what Americans think about this? Because I went back and looked today, and I didn't see many polls since about the middle of August. And there were several polls that came out, respectable polls, that suggested it was about 60-40 in favor of the $3.5 trillion. On the other hand, there was a more recent poll that sort of supported Joe Manchin for saying, let's put a pause on it. Not we're against it, but let's wait a second and see what's implied. What do you know about what the American people are feeling about this right now?
Yeah, what our poll shows is they're very worried about inflation. Even half the Democrats do not want a higher tax, higher spending bill. 55% of Americans oppose increasing taxes, and including a lot of the Democrat base. Americans are starting to see the impact of all this spending. The higher gas prices, higher food prices. They're starting to see that the jobs are maybe not coming back as quickly as they had hoped. With the end of the unemployment benefits, Americans are wanting to go back to work, looking for jobs, and they're nervous that this type of really radical tax increase and spending bill will hurt their chances of going back to work and getting a good job to take care of their families. So these ads are channeling that back up to Washington, to the congressional offices, and urging them not to. I think they're starting to work. We saw Stephanie Murphy yesterday vote no because the bill goes too far in committee. That was very brave of her because I'm sure leadership was urging all Democrats to vote for this. I think her voice needs to be heard. And hopefully there are more like her who say, we're not for the Republican agenda, but we think this goes too far. This bill doesn't work.
So what are Americans concerned about? Because as a practical matter, in my experience at least, people don't like to have their taxes raised, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They don't like that. On the other hand, they like the government to spend money if it's going to benefit them. What do you think, as we go into the midterms, what are going to be the big issues for the voters?
I think this tax bill will be a huge issue. I think competency will be. Coming out of the terrible disaster that occurred in the withdrawal from Afghanistan, our polling and other polling shows there's a lot less confidence that the Democrats are just competent at running the government. That will benefit Republicans. We saw a huge shift in the approval rating where the Democrats and Joe Biden and all the Democrats' approval and for their action so far has gone down by about 10 points. That creates an opportunity for Republicans if they put forward an agenda for how they will help economic recovery, how they will help people be able to go back to work and live a good life.
So a pocketbook you think may cut in favor of the Democrats. What about the pandemic? We just saw that recall with Gavin Newsom, who really won resoundingly out there, and Gavin Newsom really thinks it's because of what he did in fighting the pandemic.
I have to say that when the virus, or in this case the Delta variant, starts on the rise, people do vote for government action to protect them and keep them safe. But they don't want it to go too far, so that when the pandemic works its way and the threat is a lot less, they want an open economy. They want to return back to normal life. We're seeing it particularly in the education area, where Democrats and Republicans want school choice, essentially, when they see that their school's failing to do what's the best thing for their children. I think there'll be some big shifts coming out of the pandemic about what Americans really expect. A lot of them want more freedom in this, but they also want to make sure the government's doing what's right to keep them safe.
Okay, thank you so very much. Always great to have you with us. It's David McIntosh. He is the president of the Club for Growth. In the meantime, even